Hi, everyone, and welcome to Calling All Vegans, where we aim to network, support, and activate the vegan and animal rights communities, discuss the V word in a relaxed but unapologetic way, stamp out speciesism, and encourage pre-vegans to open their eyes, minds, and hearts and become vegan. I'm Sue Spar. This is my friend and co-host, Alec Bose.
Hi, everyone.
Today's guest holds a doctorate degree in both ecology and psychology. As an acclaimed expert on animal trauma who established trans-species psychology as a new field, her work has been covered widely in academic and popular media. And released this past April, her most recent book, Talking with Bears, Conversations with Charlie Russell, which right here we have it, based on a decade of their shared conversations, so eloquently tells the story of world-renowned Canadian naturalist legend Charlie Russell. It will have you falling in love with him almost as much as he loved his precious bear friends. And we're not talking Yogi and Boo Boo here. She's a trailblazer, a visionary, and a gifted animal-loving scientist. Please welcome Pulitzer Prize-nominated author, Dr. Gay Bradshaw, to Calling All Vegans. Thank you very much, Gay. Happy International Day of Peace.
Yes.
This book was certainly not just a dry documentation. Rather, it's a beautifully written love story that truly captures the essence of Charlie and does justice to his majestic bear friends. And it's accompanied by dozens and dozens of stunning photographs, which seem almost surreal, especially to so many of us who have lost touch with nature and free-living animals. Sadly, bears lost their best friend on May 7th, 2018, when Charlie passed away. So he never did get to see this labor of love bear fruit and be published.
Did you just make a bear fruit pun?
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
Now, interestingly, even though people thought it foolhardy and dangerous to live amongst bears, it wasn't the bears who killed him. It was complications after a surgery. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, Gay, tell us a little bit about how your collaboration began and what did each of you bring to the partnership that then developed into this book?
Both Charlie and I were trying to, after like almost 10 years, reconstruct how we met. And I think it really came down to someone either told Charlie, who had just been working, finished his book, Grizzly, which is a phenomenal book. I recommend people read that, plus the other books that he's written. And I had just finished my Elephants on the Edge book. And someone either told Charlie or told me, you really should get in touch with each other. I think you'll really click. Mm-hmm. So I think both of us was some kind of, like rolling of eyes of, okay, just called.
Not awkward at all, huh?
No, both Charlie and I are, inveterate yackers and about the work we do and love the animals. So that's how it started. And Charlie, of course, lived in Alberta. Well, he still lives. He's in Alberta. And I'm here in Oregon. And we just ended up clicking. And we decided to write a book. We collaborated in terms of writing letters to policymakers and different agencies on particular incidents and all. But we felt that writing a book together would be fruitful because Charlie and I come from very different backgrounds and experiences. Charlie, most people will know, or if they don't know, he grew up on the land. He came from a pioneer family, and he learned about bears. He quit school. High school, and I think was a sophomore, and he spent most of all of his life, out and about, running around, and his experience as a teenager with bears really changed him, and it became his life's mission to find out who grizzly bears really were. And for me, I have all these degrees, which I am not wedded to, nor do I worship at the shrine of science, I will say. I see it as a heuristic tool, a communication tool, and it's a good way to communicate. It's not, the truth with a capital T, but it certainly has a certain kind of logic, which is paralleled with the way Charlie thought, an analytical thought process, as well as non-human animals. So anyways, we decided that it would be a good combination, that everything that we would talk about that Charlie experienced with bears and other animals and humans was predicted by the neuropsychology. And that's where I came from, was from the neurosciences and psychology, which really started with my second dissertation on elephants and the quote unquote discovery or diagnosis of elephant post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, in wild free reliving.
I love that phrase, actually. I love that term you've coined, I guess.
Yeah. So that was our intention, kind of like the, the DNA helix, right? Charlie's experiences and mine, with the idea of validating to the public and the agencies, that's very key. I can get into that later, that the science in its most unexpurgated or whatever uncensored way predicts exactly what Charlie would experience and had experienced.
Now, would you say he saw the world through the eyes of bears? And I guess even had a bear heart?
I think he had a bear heart. I don't think he saw the world through bears' eyes. That's an interesting question. He makes a real point, and that's discussed in the book, about how he differs from most biologists. These are the people who study bears and are experts in bears, managers, etcetera, and other scientists.
Oh yeah, his methods were far different.
Well, they study to know bears or to know nature or know, and he makes a distinction between understanding and knowing. And so Charlie would never, he's such a humble person, like bears and other animals. They have a great humility. He would say he understood bears. And that means, and he would describe it, and he does describe it, and I talk about it in the book through his words, that when you seek to understand someone as opposed to know someone, you are really focused on on grasping who they are and what is important to them. And so that's where the element of care and love comes in, which is not a dimension that is embraced by standard science. So he understood bears. Did he see through the eyes of bears? I say he understood them. I think he saw through the eyes of nature, which is, in my opinion, more synoptic. And this may sound arcane, but I'm trying to answer your question.
It's good.
You'll rue the day. That the difference is because he was a human, and he had a kind of, he understood his humanness, but that didn't preclude him from being integral and fully accepted into bear society. And so he saw the world, through human eyes. This is what I surmise, but he understood bears, and is because of that, and because of his attitude and embrace of their values, he was invited into their society in the most intimate circle, which is baby bear care.
Now, the book is laid out in chapters by bear. And Charlie had a very special bond with Brandy. Did a certain bear resonate with you as you were writing the book?
No, I was really the amanuensis, in the sense of I just sit there and type while he talked. Even and I'm a lousy typer, but if anyone wanted to steal my notes, they could never understand them because they were all gobbledygook. But I was just listening. I'll just make a personal note here, is that ever since I was a child, I had wanted to be a translator or an interpreter. I had the picture of the UN and all that. And I consider that all of my work, the elephant work, the other book that I did called Carnivore Minds, which is about pumas and things like that. And Charlie's book is really as a translator and interpreter, both for Charlie and the bears.
Mm.
I guess I would say that I really resonated and learned so much about bareness, the way Charlie talks about it, and what that world is. And it transformed me. It had a huge effect on me internally, particularly when I was writing the book, because in order to be faithful and have integrity of communicating Charlie's philosophy and science, even though we were very much on the same page, we weren't identical. I really had to do a lot of internal examination, meditation, things like that, so that I would be more of a channel and not, and exclude myself from the dialogue. I'll give you a quick example of what I would tell people, or I have told people, is that let's say you go with a friend to a museum, and she or he has never seen, a Matisse or a Van Gogh or something, or whatever, Jackson Pollock. and the person walks up, your friend walks up to the painting and goes, "Wow, great frame." And so I said, that's what to me was I was trying to avoid, is that I was the frame of this masterpiece, and that was my job.
Well, hey, great frame, baby. Do you think the bears were as curious about Charlie and wanted to get to know him as much as he wanted to know them?
He spoke about this many times in many contexts, not just in Russia. He spent 10 years in Russia, where he was intimately involved with the Brown Bear Society. And the rest of his life was, aside from a couple forays, he was in Alaska and British Columbia and Alberta with grizzly bears and the spirit bear, the white black bear.
Yeah.
And he would say, not all bears like me. And I don't necessarily like all bears, but that's not the point. It's just like with people. Sometimes you click, sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
So I think there were some who were very intrigued with Charlie, and others that whatever, I got to do my job. Brandy, and for me, over time, even after I've written the book, there's just dimensions that are fathomless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a beautiful, yeah,
and her relationship and her, and Charlie and her and their relationship.
So often bears are misrepresented and mistreated. And Charlie had a huge effect on how humans perceive grizzly bears. Can you tell us a little bit about the unconventional methods that he used?
His unconventional methods was he never carried a gun. He did not go out there to study them. He was trying to understand them, and he didn't use noise. And he thought. Charlie's point is that there was nothing to substantiate past and present policy and behavior of humans toward bears. They are not naturally, quote unquote, aggressive. They are basically herbivores. Catching fish is important for them for fat reasons, and also maybe occasional ground squirrel, but they're not out there to attack you. He would always say, if that was their purpose, there wouldn't be any humans.
Yeah.
They're really strong, but they don't use their weapons as such. Mm-hmm. So his unconventionality is that he never used noisemakers. He didn't use bear spray. He carried bear spray in Russia because he was in charge of, over the years, raising 10 orphaned cubs whose mothers had been killed, and he was
to keep male bears away, right?
Yeah, and he did that because of occasionally male bears. And he wasn't sure why. Typically they were impaired in the sense of either they were old or had some illness or something. It's not a rule in the bear kingdom as such. So he never made noise. And the way he was there is his whole attitude was listening. He was not obtrusive. He called it fitting in. You fit in. And that non-confrontational, the non-separation, the non-fear based approach and way is contradicted to how people are taught to be around bears, and the agencies promulgate that. And there's no foundation scientifically. If I was go out, for example, to research grizzly bear toenails, I don't know, whatever, whatever, whatever national grant that I got to do that, right? What I would do is I'd get bear spray, and I'd have a gun on me, and there's make a lot of noise if I see the bear and everything like that. And according to Charlie, which makes sense, and Charlie was not just this kind of, I love bears. Charlie was a tough man. And if you read those chapters, I am floored. He lived like a bear. He lived like an animal, a wild animal, in the sense of he was tough. And so, all of those, so this came from experience of living on the land in the intimate ways that he did. I say it's living so close to the bone of nature. And so all of these kinds of things really amp up an animal. It's like, whoa, why is that person so afraid? What's going on? In other words, fear is contagious.
Oh yeah, it creates this tension and stress, and then everybody's jumping on the bandwagon and wanting to get involved in that.
And Charlie was a very gentle, not Mr. Softy. He was a very gentle, and that's why it worked. And he listened. He was a very experienced, he didn't like this term, but woodsman. There's a lot of time and energy that has been spent just being out there.
Now, I have a very long lead up to a really short question, but here we go. Bears seem to have a large capacity for forgiveness, and that they seem to want peaceful, coexisting relationships with humans, despite the violence and the relentless harassment, habitat loss, and fragmentation, etc., that we visit upon them. More often than not, when there's an interaction or a conflict between an animal and a human, the animal winds up getting I'll say the dirty end of the stick, okay? Even if the human was the interloper on their turf, or if the animal's habitat was encroached upon by human development. A case in point is the most recent incident on a trail in BC, where a female bear approached a jogger, appeared to curiously touch her, and then stepped back. In light of this, a trap was set for the bear, and they were talking of euthanizing or relocating her. Charlie once said, "It's not a bear problem, it's a people problem." How do you think Charlie would have responded to this incident?
Well, I think he would have been very pissed off and very upset at the brutality. The baseline, which is natural, is for our species to be integrated with nature and other animals. Native people, and again, I'm using that as a blanket term, but relatively speaking, before the Europeans colonized, things were fairly good, just based on the fact of how many bears there were, how much salmon, all the wildlife, etc. That's not exonerating in any way, in the sense of looking at hunting as the way I feel. I'm a vegan. He would have been very disturbed. And he would say they don't have the traditional food or range that they need. So one time when Charlie and I were working together early on, there was a big black bear, and I looked over the deck, and he was lying on his stomach like a bunny beach style, and I said, "Hi." Usually we get kind of a mom and a baby, right? And he goes, "Rah," and I'm like, "Oh." And I was kind of like offended. I was kind of like, my feelings were hurt, I was just trying to say hi, And he was very unusual relative to other bears. He was around during the day, and we kept our dogs and our animals in, so there wouldn't be issues at all. And I remember telling Charlie, and Charlie says the guy's he's an old bear, and he was an old bear. I hadn't been tuned in, but he was an old bear. And the thing is that what, of course, he roamed, he got shot immediately. And he's just a guy living. And we had no fear that he would, I didn't, with our dogs, I was afraid that there would be some sort of interaction, that wouldn't be positive. So we kept it in.
You used common sense, which people don't use. You use common sense by keeping your animals inside, so there was no interaction. You kept your distance, that sort of thing. People are always very quick to want to swing their head around and blame the other guy for their own shortcomings.
And we modified our behavior to accommodate him. And this is what's very important, is practically, I would say that every bear in North America has either been shot or they have witnessed their mother being shot. As Charlie would say, that, like you had mentioned, the quote unquote forgiveness. Mm-hmm. But at that same time, Charlie started to carry bear spray, as he said, when he remembered. In the last few years in Alberta, his home area, because of all the trauma.
That's it. And they're just responding to that, right? Like the way they've been
traumatized. They're severely traumatized. Even translocation that you talk about. They're brought into territory which is not their own. There's other bears there. They're like, who the hell are you?